Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast Weekly Preview Edition. I am your host, Jon Macri, fantasy analyst here at PFF, and I am once again joined by the always great Kate Magdziuk to help you all get in and then ready for the fantasy football playoffs. So, Kate, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. We've got my Steelers on Thursday Night Football, which should be the worst game of all time. It's nice. They've given us kind of an easy matchup. We don't have much to talk about for Thursday Night Football, so we could breeze on through that and then on into the Sunday slate just to put me out of my misery. But we're good. We're ready. We are going to help our listeners clinch that playoff spot if they haven't done so yet. Don't give up, my friends. Even if you haven't been eliminated, that means it doesn't matter what kind of crazy things you need to happen to clinch that playoff spot. It's still a possibility. So do not give up. And we are here to help you out.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. So yeah, looking forward to getting into it here. And we're going to go game by game as we usually do. We're going to hit on those key players and matchups throughout. Again, we'll have the timestamps in the episode description so people could find the games they're looking for as well if you're not interested in, say, Steelers, Patriots, for example. And then we only have two teams on a bye week this week, Arizona and Washington. So 15 games to go through. So we're going to get into it here in just a second, but I do want to give a quick shout out to our presenting sponsor, Fabric by Gerber Life. As a parent, you've had to learn so many new skills to provide for your family, how to do copious amounts of laundry, meal plan for even the pickiest eater, and now how to protect your family's financial future. Fabric by Gerber Life provides an easy one-stop shop for your family's financial needs, offering high-quality term life insurance policies plus other financial solutions in one easy online hub. Fabric was designed by parents for parents to help you get a high-quality, surprisingly affordable term life insurance policy in less than 10 minutes. Fabric has flexible policies to fit your family and your budget with quality policies like $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. Get your personalized quote in just minutes and then apply when it's convenient for you. It's all online and on your schedule. You could go from start to covered in less than 10 minutes with no health exam required. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/fantasy. That's meetfabric.com/fantasy, meetfabric.com/fantasy. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company. Not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. All right, Kate, you alluded to it earlier. This is our Thursday night football game this week, whether we like it or not. It is the New England Patriots at your Pittsburgh Steelers. I will let you get us started with this one. Where do you want to go first?
Oof. I guess we could talk about the Patriots because there's not much to talk about, right? Like we look at Bailey Zappi, that's a big no. You look at Ramondre Stevenson, he's out in this game with an ankle injury. So Zeke Elliott's getting the start. But this has been a much improved overall rushing defense for the Pittsburgh Steelers since the return of Cam Hayward. So like maybe a volume play there, but again, not a ton of upside. There's not going to be a ton of points scored in this game. I don't know. Is there anybody on the, literally a single player that you are willing to get the start in a season-long fantasy league? Because everybody kind of feels like dart throws. And despite the fact that they've been hurting at wide receiver, we still haven't seen a ton of involvement from the tight ends even. I think this is kind of a dud.
It's a complete dud. And I'm avoiding pretty much everybody. Zeke Elliott, like you said, a volume-based play. So like I think there's potential for him to at least see, the clear majority of the backfield work and even, as a receiver with Ramondre Stevenson out. So that helps make him like a really low-end RB2 probably in most lineups. But it's another one that you're just not excited about, right? Like you said, it's not the best matchup. It's not going to be a great game for both offenses. So you're really just hoping and praying for the volume there. And yeah, I think Zeke Elliott's probably the only one that I'm interested in. Unfortunately, Demario Douglas still out with that concussion, or else maybe he would have been a play. But even then, it's hard with Bailey Zappi at quarterback and considering the state of this offense. So yeah, that covers the Patriots. That was nice, quick, and easy. So
easy.
How about your Pittsburgh Steelers here? Because again, they've been an interesting team. Again, I mean, the running backs, as always, they love the attention. They love us talking about them here. So we did see Najee Harris play more snaps and get more carries last week, even though that wasn't necessarily the case the week before that. So what are you expecting from the Steelers running backs in week 14 now?
I'm expecting some heavy utilization here from Jaylen Warren. Now we have Najee Harris, who is questionable into this game. Looks like he's going to play Thursday night, but just a warning to the listeners: back-to-back missed practices for Ezekiel Elliott with a knee injury, or for Najee Harris with a knee injury, which is a brand new injury. So kind of concerned to have this new injury pop up on a short week. I think we can probably expect a lot of usage from Jaylen Warren. We've kind of already started to see that shift, in recent weeks, favoring more toward Jaylen Warren, but I think even more so in this game. Now, I think if Najee, probably him, even though this is really not a fantastic matchup. The Patriots are pretty solid against the run, but again, I think if you have to start any of these backs, you're kind of just going for volume, and you're going to keep your fingers crossed that either Najee finds his way into the end zone, or Jaylen Warren breaks off a nice 30-yard run, and that's kind of what you're expecting. Now, I think you're starting both of these running backs just for the workload, but again, tempering expectations, because not only, is this just a bad matchup in general, the Steelers also have two offensive linemen questionable for this game, including their center, Mason Cole, and left guard, Isaac Salamalu, who's the best run blocker the Pittsburgh Steelers have. So it could be ugly sledding all around. And maybe that means we have to pivot towards the pass, because I don't know how efficient the Steelers are going to be pounding the rock, despite their recent success. Temperature check, Mitch Trubisky, could he actually be good for this passing attack? And does Mitch Trubisky's presence under center make you any more willing to start George Pickens or Deontay Johnson?
It doesn't make me more willing to start them, I guess. I'm still,
you're not chasing them.
No, definitely not. I mean, New England, for as bad, we could kind of talk about this on the IDP preview last night too. For as bad as their offense has been, their defense has been okay. They don't have a lot of stars there, but Bill Belichick's man heavy defense has kind of found a way to still do a decent job at limiting production from especially quarterbacks. I mean, for fantasy purposes, but it hasn't been terrible. Basically, it hasn't been nearly as bad as the offense. So that's where my concern kind of comes in with a Mitchell Trubisky and Deontay Johnson and George Pickens. I still I don't hate Deontay Johnson and George Pickens, I should say, this week. I think that they've the matchup against a man heavy defense actually kind of favors them. They've both been really good against man coverage this year compared to zone. So they've seen higher target rates versus man coverage. They both got much better receiving grades against man coverage, better yards per route run across the board versus zone. They're mostly top 15, top 20 in those regards against man coverage. So that part of it I like, and I have it gives me reason to start Deontay Johnson and George Pickens, but it's not necessarily because of Mitchell Trubisky. And that's where the hesitation comes in, right? Is how good is Trubisky going to be against the Patriots? What's this offense going to look like? It already hasn't been amazing by any means. So also Thursday night, it's just bound to be a low scoring game, right? Last week was the outlier for sure. So it's just, I don't know. I like probably more in that wide receiver 3 range for both guys for me at best.
Yeah, these guys are I think all kind of in the flex territory. You're not really expecting top 24 performances from anybody, which means we could probably move on to Sunday. Put me out of my misery, John. I cannot talk about these stinky offenses anymore. We literally are heading into Thursday Night Football with the lowest projected over under in 15 years. So if you at all put any stock in point total projections, this is not a matchup to target for fantasy.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
It's not going to be good. I probably will not be tuning in until probably at least the second half. There is a more important hockey game on tonight than that. So we'll move us to the Houston Texans at the New York Jets. And I mean, I guess we can start with the Jets side of things. So again, another offense that not necessarily a great offense here. And we saw the Tim Boyle and Trevor Siemian experience last week. That did not pan out for anybody. So Zach Wilson back at the helm here. I mean, we're obviously not starting Zach Wilson.
Reluctantly, it
Yeah.
seems.
Yeah. There was reports that yeah, I mean, I kind of don't blame him. Like, why would you want to play at this point? Like, anyways, but yeah, their offense has been a complete mess all year, and it's just getting messier because they also gave Dalvin Cook a higher percentage of carries this past week, which they had talked about coming into the week. So it's like it's one of those things like why are you doing this? And it doesn't do anything for Dalvin Cook purposes, but all it does is limit the opportunity for Breece Hall, right? And that's the main thing that we're concerned about. He was getting 75 to 80% of the carries, and that dropped to just above 50% this past week. So that's just hurting his ceiling and his potential. So Breece Hall falls to, like, again, that kind of low end RB2 range, basically, especially considering the state of the offense. So I don't know. That's how I feel about it. Do you have any other different preferences for Breece Hall or Garrett Wilson even?
No, I think like this Houston Texans defense, like not the easiest, greatest pushover matchup anymore. You look at their run defense at this point. Will Anderson starting to come on a little bit. You have the Texans who are just limiting opposing running backs 3.4 yards per carry. That's the second fewest yards per carry in the league so far this season. The saving grace you've kind of had is like touchdowns, right? And
Yeah.
is this an offense, this Jets offense led by Zach Wilson and, whatever mishmash at quarterback and running back they're going to have this week? Am I going to bet on them to spend a lot of time in the end zone? Probably not. So I think that you're kind of just banking on one of these like breakaway runs, hopefully for Breece Hall, maybe a little bit involvement as a receiver. Other than that, like you do start Garrett Wilson because he's Garrett Wilson, but still wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 territory.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And yeah, he's at least
It
seeing more
hurts.
targets with Zach Wilson. Yeah, it's been brutal. Like they haven't been high quality targets all year. Still somehow an upgrade from Tim Boyle and Trevor Siemian, but it's not enough for Garrett Wilson to be like a must start option here, which is unfortunate compared to what we were thinking of him coming into the year. So on the Texans side of things, Kate, I know you wrote in your the rushing report this week about Dameon Pierce and Devin Singletary's usage this past week. So we did see closer to a split. It had been previously like very Devin Singletary heavy this offense. So how are you feeling about the Houston Texans running back situation at this point after seeing what it was last week?
I'm kind of trying to avoid this backfield in general if I have the luxury to do it. Now, I looked at Dameon Pierce's usage in his return, played 18% of offensive snaps, but that, shifted slightly, just ever so slightly in week 13, but he did start to get the carries. He had 14 total carries on the day. Singletary had just 8. Pierce saw the work in the red zone, saw the only goal line carry. So it looks like maybe this is back to Pierce's job. But the weird thing is, you look at all the metrics, and I love Dameon Pierce, but he is very inefficient this season. He's averaging just 3 yards per carry. He's been stuffed on 46.2% of rush attempts in week 13. That is the highest rate of any running back with 10 or more carries on the week. He hasn't been efficient. So I look at the Texans, who I think are a very smart organization, and I think they've got to look at the production and want to get Singletary more touches. When he got volume, he was productive. I don't know. This backfield is not a good feeling for me. The Jets, not a pushover matchup at running back either. So again, with the mishmash of, Pierce getting the touches, Singletary getting the snaps, it's a lot to chase down points in this type of matchup where I don't think there's going to be a whole ton of room to run. And this might be kind of like one of these tougher defensive matchups, especially with the Texans on the road. could be a nasty environment on the road.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm avoiding the group as well, and it just sucks. Like if we were still seeing like the 80% of snaps for Devin Singletary, obviously would feel a little bit better about it. But this isn't the week to kind of mess with this stuff, as the Texans kind of look like they're shifting their backfield usage a little bit. It's just one to kind of stay away from and avoid this week if you can. Like you said, I know not everybody can afford to necessarily, but I mean, if you have to start one, for me, it's probably Dameon Pierce, just like you said, because of the goal line work and him getting a little bit more of the carries there. But you're not going to feel great about it for sure, especially against the Jets here. Other than that, I mean, their wide receivers, Tank Dell, obviously that was a big blow here to fantasy managers, done for the year. So Nico Collins still a starter, obviously, even though it's not a great matchup going against the Jets this week, but there's going to be room for another wide receiver to emerge here for fantasy purposes. It might not be this week. So Noah Brown, I'm not starting this week. I don't know how you feel about him, but it's pretty much just Nico Collins for me as far as wide receivers go for the Texans. How about you?
Yeah, you don't love this matchup. Obviously DJ Reed, Sauce Gardner, best cornerback duo in the league right now. Not a matchup you're chasing, but I mean, Nico Collins, man, so much respect to Nico Collins. He has played at a truly elite level that you can't sit at this point. Like there is no upside in sitting him whatsoever. You look at the way he's produced, he is producing as an elite wide receiver one. Ranks top 5 in pretty much every metric you could think of in terms of an efficiency standpoint. You start Nico Collins. Now, the one thing I'll say, I'm really not looking to start CJ Stroud in this outing. I think this is kind of a trap game on the road. We've seen some pretty significant road splits from, CJ Stroud throughout this season so far. He's thrown just 4 total touchdowns on the road over 5 games this year. You've seen, almost 2 fewer yards per pass attempt from CJ Stroud on the road this year. Just a 2% touchdown rate, like across the board. We've seen this upside is significantly limited for CJ Stroud on the road. So pair that with the fact that this is a pretty suffocating secondary. I want no part of it.
Yeah, that's a good call for sure. And then it probably affects their tight ends as well. Like we talked a little bit about the tight ends last week because Dalton Schultz was questionable going into the week. He didn't end up playing. And you had talked about Brevin Jordan being a nice option here. And he was a solid option, 3 catches for 64 yards. He looked good. Dalton Schultz limited on Wednesday with that hamstring injury. So not sure if he's going to play or not. It'll be interesting to see what the usage is because Jordan looked good. I'll be interested to see if they limit Schultz a little bit if he does play. Jordan typically hasn't been a factor when Dalton Schultz is in the lineup. I don't think he's ever ran more than 21% of the routes, I think it was, prior to the Dalton Schultz injury. So that's at least something to kind of keep an eye on. I don't know that I'd be starting either guy this week against the Jets.
No, just across the board. Again, there's some great, defensive matchups that the league has paired up for us, but this is not good news for fantasy managers.
No, it is definitely not. All right, let's go to the LA Rams at the Baltimore Ravens now. And where do you want to start with this game?
Let's start with the Rams. So I think it's time that we have a conversation about Cooper Kupp, or continuing that conversation, because fantasy managers might be feeling like kind of good after last week. Like, here's the thing. He didn't hurt you as much as he has in previous weeks. 6 catches, 39 receiving yards, and a touchdown. I need to know at this point, what is your temperature check on Cooper Kupp heading into week 14? And has he officially lost his must start tag?
This week, I would think for sure. I don't love him against the Ravens this week. He's like probably fringe wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 for me this week. So he's not really that must start, right? And I wrote about him in the man zone coverage report as well. And Baltimore definitely one of those more man heavy defenses in the league. And they've been very good at it. So both Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp have struggled against man coverage. Even though Nacua, he had a nice game last week against the Browns, but he did that against their zone defense, which was, so just to kind of keep in mind there's obviously potential that they could still do things. But Cooper Kupp, he's earned a 31% target rate versus man coverage, but he ranks tied for 70th among wide receivers in fantasy points per route run. He has a 60.5 receiving grade, which is 83rd, and he has a 0.91 yards per route run figure, which is 89th among wide receivers, all against man coverage. So despite the target rate, he's just not been able to do anything with it. And that is like beyond inefficient at that point. So it's pretty concerning. And even when Puka Nacua was out of the game last week, like he still didn't really blow up. Like he did get the touchdown for us, like you said, so that kind of saved his week. But I'm with you. I'm concerned about Cooper Kupp right now.
Ugh, it makes me sad to say, but I mean, another tough matchup. I think this could be yet another ugly game. Puka Nacua, meanwhile, I think he's, a fine play. I'd prefer Puka at this point over Cooper Kupp, just for the upside there. But again, not loving the matchup here. This Ravens defense has been absolutely suffocating in terms of EPA per play. Like every metric you can think of now, we've seen, Matthew Stafford come out and be productive in some pretty challenging matchups. Is there any chance you're starting Matthew Stafford in this game in week 14? Just given some of the tough matchups we have around the league, like, can you, it's a no for me.
I think it's a no for me as well.
Okay.
And I feel better about Stafford, like matchups that I like really favorable matchups is where I've liked him. It's just that start to the year was enough to kind of concern me about Stafford. I know he's been much better as of late, but I don't think so. I don't think.
Okay.
And Nate wrote about him in start sit as well, and he put him as a sit, mentioning that no quarterback has thrown 3+ passing touchdowns against the Ravens. Only 2 have thrown for 2 scores, and both signal callers needed 45 dropbacks to get there, which is a mark that Stafford has only reached twice this season. So yeah, he's also down on Matthew Stafford this week. So I think we all are pretty much across the board. So maybe it's just the Kyren Williams week.
Matthew Stafford or Geno Smith?
Oh God. That's close.
I just want to see how low we're going to go here.
Yeah, I don't like Geno Smith either this week, but I think I'd probably, oh God, do I have to go Geno? I guess I'd have to go Geno.
Okay. Matthew Stafford or Gardner Minshew. These might be the type of quarterbacks that our listeners are deciding between if they've been streaming and if they've been relying on Matthew Stafford.
I like Minshew. I think I would go Minshew. I think it's a much better matchup for him. And he's been a solid fantasy quarterback too.
You heard it here first, folks. Geno and Gardner Minshew over Matthew Stafford this week.
Yeah, I think so, unfortunately. But
sorry to say it.
I'll be happy to be wrong about that one if Stafford does well, because I do like him as a quarterback. But yeah, just really don't like the matchup this week against the Ravens for any of the receiving options, and that hurts Stafford as well. So anybody else on the Rams for you?
No. Kyren Williams or bust, baby.
Williams, sure. Yeah. Kyren Williams has been excellent. Yeah, I think 94% of snaps last week. That's the kind of usage we love to see.
Yes.
So on the Ravens side of things, speaking of usage that we like to see, Keaton Mitchell is coming out of the bye week now, and I feel like we're expecting him to kind of continue his increase in snaps, right? So he's been on this really nice upward trend where he's played more snaps each and every week. He's had a higher route participation percentage every single week as well. We've seen Gus Edwards and Justice Hill usage kind of go down in recent weeks as well, even though Gus Edwards still getting that goal line work. So I'm feeling better about Keaton Mitchell as a potential starter. Maybe not this week, until we know for sure that usage has gone up, but I think there's at least a chance that he kind of sees around that 60% of snaps range and starts to get better carry rates and target rates as well. So how are you feeling about this Ravens backfield?
All right, looking at the Ravens backfield, I think week 12 was a little bit insightful, right? You had Keaton Mitchell, he got his first career start. Like you mentioned, he's been seeing this increase in snap percentage participation. He's also subsequently been seeing a decrease each week in his special teams participation, which I think is kind of, this christening for a guy who's really starting to earn his way into the offense. I think if you're going to start one of these guys, it's got to be Keaton Mitchell. Gus Edwards, it really seems like this team has, despite all of the touchdowns he scored over the past month and a half, it does seem like the team's kind of navigating away. And you know what, like coming out of a bye, I feel like this is kind of that's the team's week to kind of initiate some changes and implement some bigger changes in the offense. That might be this kind of turnkey moment for Keaton Mitchell coming out of the bye to really kind of take on a workhorse type role. But I do think this is one of the more volatile backfields in the league. But again, if you got to pick a guy, I think it's Keaton Mitchell or bust for me.
Yep, I'm with you 100%. I think that makes perfect sense, especially coming out of the bye there, that we see more work for him. Other than that, we got the wide receivers. I feel okay about Zay Flowers. I don't mind Zay Flowers this week. Not like in love with him by any means, but anybody else for receiving options for you for the Ravens, like Isaiah Likely, I know didn't have that huge game, and he, it's been only the one game without Mark Andrews basically this year, where I think people were expecting him to have that 20 to 25% target rate that he saw last year when Mark Andrews was out. That hasn't been the case here, but doesn't necessarily mean that it won't happen. It's only been one game, and it's a pretty good matchup here against the Rams. So, how do you feel about Isaiah Likely this week?
I think fine play, but I will say there are, I think, plenty of other kind of stream worthy options that might be a little bit more fruitful. See, my issue with putting too much stock in this Ravens passing offense in general has been their tendency to run up the score, and then they're either pulling their starters or they're playing some really conservative football. And that has, I think, sometimes limited their overall passing offense, which has been kind of brutal for fantasy managers because you're kind of navigating that tumultuous part of the offense, even though, the talent's there. So, I think if you have another option, I'd prefer someone over Isaiah Likely, just, on this idea that, game script can really start to shift these offenses in either direction, but you could do worse.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, right? That's a really good point about the Ravens offense right now. And they've been so good that it makes it that there's at least the potential. It's like the Dallas offense, right? That we've seen them pull their starters as well. And that was kind of hurting Tony Pollard earlier in the year as well. But this Ravens team has been very, very good this year. There's always that potential there as well. So I think that's it for this game. Let's move to the Indianapolis Colts at the Cincinnati Bengals. And let's start with the Bengals, because last week we saw Jake Browning on Monday night have a pretty solid game. And I think that was a relief to a lot of fantasy managers that Jamar Chase's fantasy value isn't dead yet. So that was really nice to see. We could comfortably start Jamar Chase again. How about the rest of this Bengals offense? How are you feeling about guys like T. Higgins, who really just hasn't done much so far this season? Are you thinking that we could potentially see T. Higgins be a bit better this week, another week removed from the injury?
Just given the lack of production from T. Higgins when he's been on the field, I'm kind of okay sitting T. Higgins until like show me something. I need to see something. I need to see any signs of life from T. Higgins. And like to that point, I mean, even when he's been on the field, he has helped you, or he has hurt you more often than he has helped you this season. So that's kind of like my barometer for whether or not I can sit this player with high upside. what's the payoff? And I mean, T Higgins, the payoff has not been great. So I'm fine sitting T Higgins. I think you're starting Joe Mixon, and that you're starting Joe Mixon, you're starting Jamar Chase, and yeah, and you're looking at T Higgins, and he is a guy who has finished let's see, since week 1, wide receiver 109, week 2, wide receiver 4, wide receiver 82, wide receiver 81, wide receiver 78, wide receiver 37. Like, this guy has absolutely killed you, and you on any of these weeks could have found more production on the waiver wire. No.
Yeah, you're finding more production probably from Giants and Patriots wide receivers compared to
Yes,
T
which is
Higgins.
terrifying.
Yeah, it's I have no problem sitting T Higgins this week. I am sitting T Higgins this week in multiple leagues, and I don't feel bad about it. If he does go off and he has a good game, that's fine. I'm fine waiting for that production, but I'm not putting him in and waiting for that production for him to put up one of those wide receiver 80 something games on the week. It's just not worth it at this point in the season. So yeah, without Joe Burrow at quarterback too, right? Yeah, it's just it's so risky to put him in at this point. So avoiding T Higgins. Other than that, I mean, Tanner Hudson's been fine, but this is really more like a streamer tight end. I don't think I'm starting Tanner Hudson either. So Nick Botiford wrote up Jake Browning too as his QB streamer of the week as well. So shout out to Nick. I think Jake Browning could be one of those potential streaming quarterbacks this week. I might even play Jake Browning over Matthew Stafford this week. So there's that. All right. On the Indianapolis Colts side of things, we quickly talked about Gardner Minshew. I do still like him this week. The Bengals are giving up the 6th most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. Gardner Minshew, Michael Pittman have been an amazing combo. Since week 8, only Tyreek Hill and CeeDee Lamb have a higher target rate than Michael Pittman's 32% target rate. So he's been just elite, and I have no problem obviously leaving him locked into my wide receiver 1 spot if I have him. But other than that, Zach Moss, also, we just talked about the glorious usage for Kyron Williams. Zach Moss played 94% of snaps last week, handled 91% of the rush attempts, 68% route participation, all the goal line snaps. Yes, please, more of that, Zach Moss.
More of that, Zach Moss, and we're just going to hope that, it results in a little bit more production this week. But, it felt like every time Zach Moss touched the ball, you were like this close to maybe getting fantasy points, and it just didn't come to fruition. But hopefully some of that luck will turn around the Cincinnati Bengals. Fine matchup against opposing running backs. Should be, like a top 5 performer in terms of total touches, I think, on the week fairly easily, barring any injury, knock on wood. But yes, you are all over Zach Moss. Another, probably a must start at every point this year. The Bengals are allowing a ton of explosive passing plays. Now, I do think from the angle of upside against these Cincinnati Bengals, one other wide receiver, it feels like there's always one, right? Like last week it was Alec Pierce. Before it's been Josh Downs. Do you trust any of these secondary receiving options up against the Bengals outside of Michael Pittman? And that could include tight ends.
It could include tight ends. Yeah, I don't trust the Colts tight ends. That's like a roulette wheel of who's going to have the good week. So I try to stay away from their tight ends as much as possible. But if I do have to trust a Colts wide receiver, I think I still trust Josh Downs more than I trust Alec Pierce. I know Alec Pierce had the nice week and all, but Downs has just been more consistent throughout the season, and he's been nicely involved there as their primary slot receiver. I know he's going up against Mike Hilton this week, who's one of the better slot corners in the NFL. But I think, as far as targets go, Minshew does still target Josh Downs at a pretty high rate. It wasn't so much last week, but prior to that had been over 20 to 25% in each of the past like 5 or 6 weeks. So that's where I do like Josh Downs, and I probably would still trust him in deeper leagues, I should say.
I think that's fair.
Nice. All right, let's go to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Atlanta Falcons. Where do you want to start with this game?
Ooh, let's start with the Falcons, right?
Mhm.
Is it the same old Falcons? Like what are we doing with the Atlanta Falcons? Because they're the most frustrating offense in the league still. You have Bijan Robinson, who's a must start every week, not the best matchup to opposing running backs. But this should be a really good matchup for the receivers. So you look at Tampa Bay, their secondary has just been demolished with injuries this year, allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, 15th most fantasy points per game to tight ends. Kyle Pitts, I'm going to lump him in with the wide receiver group for that favorable matchup. But Kyle Pitts, Drake London, can you start them in this matchup? I think like if you can't start them against the Bucs, this is probably the last time you're going to be able to start them all season, because it should be a good one. They're at home in a dome.
Yeah, I think London, oh God, it's so dependent on who else I have as an option there, because the offense, the passing offense is absolutely brutal. Like that's why he had ended up with 1 catch for 8 yards or whatever it was last week on like 5 targets, right? It's not even like he's getting a ton of targets there, but I would rather have Drake London, I guess, than Kyle Pitts if I have to put one in like a flex spot or something like that. God, it's such a brutal passing offense. It makes me frustrated to think about. But I guess like as a flex, Drake London it would be an option for me, but not inside of that top 24. So I probably have him outside of that range. Unfortunately, as good as he is, it's not his fault. It's just Desmond Ridder and company, and plus this being like more run heavy team as well. Like there's the opportunity there is limited, and that's where he just falls down the board for me.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. Definitely depends on your other options, I think, available. And again, this should be a fruitful matchup. We have seen Drake London, he's good. The biggest barrier to that has just been the quarterback play, which that kind of frustration is where we're at. I mean, I will say, the last week had 5 targets, 1 reception, 8 receiving yards. So brutal. They were on the road against the New York Jets, which a matchup we already talked about. Absolutely daunting for wide receivers, daunting for quarterbacks, regardless of the talent level. And so, of course, I think the overall ceiling for Drake London and the overall floor, probably a little bit better than most weeks in this matchup, but I don't know. 4 of his top 5 receiving yard games have come at home this season. I don't
Okay,
know. I don't
that's
know.
nice.
I'm
Yeah, no,
that's
I'm
nice.
with you.
I mean, I'm just trying to like talk. I do have to
Yeah.
start Drake London in a couple spots, and I'm trying to talk myself into it. I mean, last week, I think was the first time. Was it the first time Desmond Ridder ever threw a touchdown on the road? Am I totally
Was
making
it?
that
I
up?
actually don't know if it was or
I'm
not.
pretty
I
sure
wouldn't be
that, yeah,
surprised.
to my Cole Pruitt, pretty sure that was his first
Uh,
road touchdown ever. Um, which, again, just kind of shows you this team has been more productive at home. Um, I'm fine. I think he's going to finish in my rankings probably somewhere around wide receiver 20 to 24.
Okay. Okay. I think it's fair. And like you said, it's a better matchup this week for sure than it was against the Jets. Obviously, it's just, yeah, I just have such little faith in this passing offense right now. But there's definitely going to be leagues where I have to start Drake London. And yeah, I don't know, I'm not excited about it, but like you said, I do appreciate you highlighting some of the optimistic points so I could feel maybe a little bit better about it. So heading into the week. So I do like
Again, you're
that.
not going to want to watch the game, folks. You're not going to want to
No,
watch the
no,
game.
no, not watching this one. About on the Tampa Bay side of things, it's a tougher matchup for the running backs and the wide receivers this week. The Bucks defense has been solid in that regard. So I still like this for Rashad White. He's just had some of the best usage among running backs so far this season. So fine starting him, despite the Falcons giving up the second fewest fantasy points per game to the running back position. On the wide receiver side of things, so Mike Evans obviously is a start. How do you feel about like Chris Godwin as a potential? So would you rather start Chris Godwin or Drake London maybe?
I think I'm leaning Drake London. I mean, at
Yeah.
this point in the season, both have had kind of a relatively similar ceiling and floor. But Drake London's ceiling might just be like that much higher from a touchdown perspective, which seems crazy to say. But I think that's kind of where we're at. Chris Godwin, I was expecting a much better year for him, I'll say, than what we've seen so far. You know, it just hasn't necessarily clicked with him and Baker Mayfield. And you know who is clicking with Baker Mayfield? Mike Evans. And
Mm-hmm.
it's very palpable. And Rashad White being as heavily involved as a receiver as he has been, he's seeing the kind of volume I thought Chris Godwin might see. You know, I thought we might get another 120 to 140 target season for Chris Godwin. It doesn't seem like that's going to be the case this year. But, you know, I don't think there's I don't know. I don't think there's as much upside there as we would like to believe.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
it's not
there's
a great
really
matchup.
no, it's not, and you're right. There's just not been the upside with Chris Godwin this year, and he's dealing with an injury right now. I think it's his neck, so he hasn't played like a true like full-time role. He's been coming off the field a little bit more. Didn't have a catch last week either, so not interested in Chris Godwin. I'm with you. I would rather start Drake London if those are the options there too. Anything else from this game?
No.
No. Let's let's go to the Detroit Lions at the Chicago Bears. Man, let's start with Chicago. They got some interesting stuff here at running back going on, right? So they're coming out of a bye week, but in week 12, before their bye, Roschon Johnson kind of dominated the playing time, right? And that was with Khalil Herbert in the lineup and with D'Onta Foreman inactive. So D'Onta Foreman no longer on the injury report. I think there's a chance that we could see a timeshare again here with this Bears backfield, and potentially Roschon going back to that maybe third down / passing down role. I mean, there's obviously the chance that somebody could be a healthy scratch. We've seen them do that before as well, in which case we'd probably like maybe a Roschon Johnson a bit more, as long as he's not the one being scratched. But how do you feel about this Bears backfield heading into this week? Because as the way it stands right now, it's a group to avoid for me.
It definitely a group to avoid. I think if you can afford to, you look at just their usage heading into the bye. You know, my biggest takeaway was definitely the fact that I mean, Roschon in comparison to Khalil Herbert in some of these like critical situations, Roschon Johnson was the guy. You know, he was on the field for third downs. He kind of just took over the backfield. You know, after all of that kind of heavy workload for Khalil Herbert in his first game back from IR, he just kind of took a back seat. And, you know, none of these running backs were super efficient the last time they were on this field. But, you know, I think all in all, you know, when you're trying to come up with some of the upside plays here, Roschon Johnson probably has the biggest role in the receiving game. So like I tend to lean a little bit more in their favor, in Johnson's favor. But again, this is one of those backfields that I don't necessarily know that there are a ton of telltale signs at this point giving us an idea of what to expect before these games and what their game plan for these backs might be. Because all of them, you know, pretty darn good when they get a significant workload. This could just be a nasty three-headed monster.
Yeah, that's kind of the way that I'm thinking it's going to end up this week, as long as, again, one of those guys doesn't get scratched before the game when the inactives are announced. So trying to avoid it where I can. Like you said, if I have to start with someone, it is probably Roschon Johnson. But other than that, for the Bears offense, I mean, Justin Fields, Cole Kmet, DJ Moore, feel fine about those guys. Anybody else stand out for you for Chicago as potential starters?
No,
No.
I
Yeah.
no. God, this is just John. This is the situations. Uh, uh, this is just such an ugly week for fantasy, and it's so unfortunate because
Yeah.
this is such an important week. I feel like this might end up being one of the lowest scoring fantasy weeks we've seen all year.
It's
I'm calling it now.
It's definitely possible. It's feeling this way. When I was going through all the game by game matchups and doing the notes, I was like, there's nobody that I love this week. Like there's a couple that I feel good about and starting, like, and they're just the usual guys that we've been starting. So we'll try to find a few more, but like you said, it's going to be a stressful week, I think, as far as fantasy managers what they have to deal with this week, and we're all feeling it. We're all feeling it here in week 14. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. On the Lions side of things, I guess maybe running backs we could talk about. You had talked about the Lions running backs in the rushing report this past week, and David Montgomery handling the very like the headline, the Lions share of the work at running
Bah.
back. So what are you expecting here for David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs this week?
I mean, you're starting both of these running backs every single week. Now, this is, not a great matchup. The Chicago Bears have been, pretty kind of stingy to opposing runners in terms of efficiency. But you're starting both of these running backs, from a standpoint of explosive playmaking ability. Obviously, Jahmyr Gibbs has the edge there, but I mean, David Montgomery, he cannot be stopped in the red zone, and he gets those valuable touches there. Last week, he had Jahmyr Gibbs get them right down into the goal line, and boom, David Montgomery comes in, snipes the rushing touchdown. Like their usage pattern is kind of clear, but Jahmyr Gibbs obviously like more involved in these valuable touch areas than he was maybe like before Montgomery's injury, but still it that little timeshare there, I think, does somewhat limit Jahmyr Gibbs's upside. So I think you have to take that with a grain of salt. But again, upside's so great you can't sit either of them in any matchup at this point. But on the road against the Bears, especially, like we've seen the Lions kind of struggle on the road. I don't know, this could be an ugly game, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if they kind of channel this all through the run in this outing, as long as Chicago lets them.
Yeah, I'm with you. I feel pretty good about starting these guys. I know we saw, a more favorable game script for Detroit this past week compared to when they were trailing Green Bay in week 12 as well, right? So these closer games, and I think Chicago could give them a bit of a harder time so that, could keep both of the running backs involved, right? Where if they're not trailing by a large margin, it won't just be Jahmyr Gibbs. But yeah, I'm definitely with you. Starting both guys feels right to me. And Jared Goff, fine quarterback option against Chicago. He's been very good this year, and that means Amon-Ra St. Brown, obviously a starter. Sam Laporta is a starter. Is there anybody else you're considering for the Detroit Lions offense?
No, the one name that's kind of coming into mind, like Jamison Williams,
Yeah.
have kind of seen him, emerge a little bit more, had a touch or a couple of touchdowns this season. Had a rushing touchdown. I don't think you can like bank on his involvement. He's never seen more than 2 touches in a game, but just wanted to throw that out there because he did have the touchdown last week. So like you might have some fantasy managers say like, well, he's had a touchdown in 2 of the last 3 games. I think it's a little bit too volatile to trust. And that's unfortunate. Lots of talent there, but hasn't necessarily come to fruition in any sort of consistent way that I think you can really trust from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, as much as he's had those explosive plays and everything, like you said, he had the fun touchdown last week where he dove into the end zone and everything like that. But it's just they haven't seemed to fully embrace him as that wide receiver too, right? Like they were kind of ramping up his workload for a few weeks, and it's just kind of plateaued here around that 60% range over the past few weeks. And like you said, the touches just aren't there for him. So yeah, it becomes a riskier play for sure, and really more just again like super deep leagues. And we only got 2 teams on bye this week as well. So it leaves you with a little bit more options. And you don't have to start Jameson Williams, I would hope.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. I did have to start him last week with the 6 teams on bye in a deeper league. And luckily he scored that touchdown, but it wasn't like it was an amazing game by any means. Let's go to the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Cleveland Browns here. And Trevor Lawrence was back at practice today. So I don't know if he's going to play. That it's definitely, it seems unlikely, especially when you saw the injury last week. It looked pretty bad, and he limped
It
his
took
way
two
all the way to
trainers carrying him to the locker room.
It's crazy. And
No
yeah,
way.
apparently he said like he's not he waved off the card or something like that, which I don't understand. I mean, that felt like maybe it was a decent sign that he was okay, but it took forever for him to get to that locker room. So I don't know. I doubt he plays this week is I guess my concern here. And going against the Cleveland Browns, if he's not 100% or if he's not playing, there's not many Jaguars options I feel very comfortable starting, and that includes Calvin Ridley and Evan Ingram. I'm fine starting Travis Etienne, but even then I have like lower expectations, right? He's not like a locked in RB1 for me necessarily. So how about you? What's your read on this Jacksonville offense, assuming it's under CJ Beathard this week?
Absolutely terrified to start Calvin Ridley. I think he could be a really big trap this week. Just with the knowledge that Christian Kirk is out for this game. I know people might get excited about the volume, but I mean, you look at CJ Beathard, third lowest accuracy rate in week 13 in that limited role he played. The Browns are a very good defense. We talked about the Jets, like the Browns are right there with them in terms of their coverage. No way you're going to be able to trust, I think, CJ Beathard's pass attack. The only player that kind of has me a little bit curious is Evan Ingram. Finally scored his first touchdown of the season last week. And I think, generally speaking, sometimes when we see these quarterbacks come in, they'll take some of those relatively safer, matchups for the tight end position, just targeting like the biggest body on the field. And, I think from a volume perspective, we might see a little bit, from Evan Ingram, but again, like this matchup, just not great for any position to be overly efficient, which at that point you really just have to count on volume, and you have to count on the fact that Beathard's going to be able to deliver the targets accurately. And I'm not sure you can count on either of those things.
Yeah, and the Browns, who were without Denzel Ward last week as well, so that also helped Puka Nacua Cooper Kupp in that situation. Denzel Ward is expected back this week, so that makes it a little bit tougher them getting their top cornerback. And then yeah, Evan Ingram, I guess he's on the fringe of starting for me in like one tight end leagues, right? Where I guess just the concern, like you said, it's the toughest matchup as far as fantasy points per game goes to tight ends. And then thinking about CJ Beathard at quarterback, thinking about that Browns pass rush and everything like that, I wanted to look at, what's Evan Ingram's target rate look like on pressure dropbacks. It drops to 8.6% target rate, which is 49th out of 67 tight ends this year, when he's usually been a top 10 tight end in target rate with a 21.4% on just neutral dropbacks, overall dropbacks. So when there's pressure on the play, they haven't really gone to him. And I know that's been with Trevor Lawrence at quarterback. So it just at least has me concerned here against the Browns' elite defensive line. The Jaguars' O-line has been about average. And like you said, concerned about Calvin Ridley for sure. He's had 3 games of 100 yards or more this year, but he's also had 7 games of 40 yards or fewer this year. So super volatile. And this is not the matchup, I don't think, for Calvin Ridley to have one of those big games. So yeah, avoiding them across the board, and Travis Etienne, probably the one that I feel most comfortable with.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
All right, let's go to the Carolina Panthers at the New Orleans Saints. Anywhere in particular you want to start with these two teams?
No, let's roll the dice. Where you want to go?
Let's go with let's start with the Carolina Panthers, and you talk about their running backs a little bit. And again, I know you talked about them in the rushing report as well, and it was interesting, right? Because I think we talked about it last week, or I talked about it somewhere on one of the million pods that I did before the games last week. But like the usage between Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders didn't really change much from weeks 12 to 13. It was just more the amount of times that they ran the ball with Sanders on the field was much higher versus when Hubbard was on the field in week 12, right? So those numbers went back to more expected numbers in week 13, where Chuba Hubbard, who's had the playing time and he's had the usage, we saw him get back to that workhorse role like you highlighted. So I thought that was a nice job kind of highlighting that stuff. But yeah, I feel pretty good about Chuba Hubbard. Another week removed here from Frank Reich and Miles Sanders not being heavily involved either that first week there. So I think there's potential for Chuba Hubbard to remain in starting lineups this week. I know it's not an amazing matchup against the Saints, but I like Chuba Hubbard. I think he's been solid this year for the most part. How you feel about them?
I'm excited about Chuba Hubbard. Back-to-back weeks with a rushing touchdown here. You look at the rushing defense too, like for the Saints, they've actually kind of let up a little bit in terms of their like suffocating run defense, right? Like since week 9, they rank second highest in terms of explosive run percentage allowed. They've been beatable. They're giving up yards after contact per attempt. They're not as bad as they used to be. So I think there could be a little bit of room to grow here. Again, in that span, have allowed the 5th most rushing yards, the 4th highest rush yards per attempt, allowing opposing rushers 5 yards per attempt in that span. Like, we're starting to see this defense wear down a little bit. So I think this could be an interesting spot. I love the fact that you shouted out 1 week further out from Frank Reich, as though he's like an illness that this offense is recovering from, which he kind of is. But I think that's the most telling thing, right? Is like the shift in that volume towards the run. Seeing Chuba Hubbard get a career high 25 carries in the first game with this new coaching staff, I think is just a really telltale sign that they're leaning toward Hubbard. Like, this isn't, they didn't even take the opportunity to give Miles Sanders all that much run to earn his spot back, right? Like, they seem pretty sold on Hubbard. I think he's a great play moving forward. I love the potential for volume. I don't mind. I don't mind it.
Yeah, I like him, and yeah, probably not the best wording for me for 1 week removed from Frank.
So I think it's perfect. I think the wording was just fine. I just wanted to highlight it because it was chef's kiss.
All right, how about their passing offense here? Because I mean, Bryce Young, it hasn't been great this year. Obviously, not a lot of yardage there for the first overall pick, and we've seen it affect Adam Thielen as of late, right? And I know this was another one that you wrote about in the panic or antic column this week. Adam Thielen coming off a week with just 25 receiving yards. We've seen Jonathan Mingo lead the team in receiving yards in each of the past 2 weeks. So where are you at with Mr. Thielen here, who started off so hot?
Started off super, super, super hot. Weeks 1 through 8 was the overall wide receiver 8. Like, he was the king of volume, and he's sort of seen a small drop in his target share with the emergence of Jonathan Mingo. Obviously, he's a rookie, not going to start off necessarily like red hot. Also, we're seeing a drop and decrease of like catchable targets for Adam Thielen, which I think is largely symptomatic of the offense in its entirety. I think this team is going to continue to try and emphasize that run as much as possible. Um, take some pressure off of your rookie quarterback, establish the run, get in rhythm there, and supplement that where you need to with the pass. I'm not looking to put all my trust in Adam Thielen. I think they're going to be I think they need to be a more conservative passing offense at this point and try to take as much off of Bryce Young's plate as possible, because the game, it feels like every week we're going on, it seems like it's getting faster for him and not slower. And they've got to put that cycle to an end.
Yeah, they really do. It's been rough, and kind of feel bad for Bryce Young and just being kind of thrown into the fire here. Not a lot of great options, and not a great offense. But I guess like if I have to start a Carolina wide receiver, I'm still starting Adam Thielen, but he's not like a must start. He's not a complete fade for me. He's just somebody that I'm putting in out of desperation, or if I have to, kind of thing, because he has at least done his best work against man coverage this year. The Saints are still one of those more man heavy teams, and he's still among the best wide receivers in the league against man coverage this season. I know it hasn't felt that way recently, but it should face a lot more man this week if they start to take it easy, like you said, on Bryce Young, give him a little bit more opportunity to breathe. We might see a little bit more of those catchable targets, hopefully, for Adam Thielen, and less so of the disaster that has been the offense as of late. But I think anybody else for this game, or should we keep moving?
Let's keep rolling.
Let's do it. All right, let's let you know that this podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is a skill-based real money daily fantasy sports game. How does it work? You pick 2 to 6 players. If they will go more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you could win up to 25 times your money on any entry. Kate, do you have any Prize Picks props for us that you like this week?
All right, this week, this is going to be a Thursday night pick. So hopefully you're listening before Thursday Night Football, but I really want to shout out, and this is going to be a line to watch, I think, moving forward with Mitch Trubisky. Allen Robinson's receiving total for week 14, sitting at 11.5 receiving yards, which, you look at Allen Robinson, not been productive this season with Kenny Pickett, but I want to shout out the fact that Mitch Trubisky is literally, or Allen Robinson, literally the most targeted receiver Mitch Trubisky has ever had throughout his career. No wide receiver or any player of any position has seen more targets from Mitch Trubisky in his career than Allen Robinson has. Don't forget about their years back to the Bears. In one half last week, they hit this total 19 receiving yards in some limited play with these two together. I think we might see this connection continue to boil over. How about you? What are you rolling?
I like that.
With?
I like that. Yeah, it only takes one catch for that one to happen. So I like that. I'm always happy with those. But yeah, I talked about it. My JSN under, we've talked about that a few times. Didn't have any IDP props on the preview episode last night, but we did get them up tonight. And so it is another Thursday night one I wanted to put out there. And that is Alex Highsmith over 0.25 sacks. He had 14 and a half sacks last year. Obviously, he's regressed a little bit in that regard, but he's got a career high 83.2 pass rush grade. That's 11th among edge defenders, 16.7% win rate, 13.2% pressure rate, all career high numbers for him, going up against the Patriots, who are the 6th worst pass blocking unit in the league. He is facing Trent Brown, but Bailey Zappi at quarterback. The Steelers also stunt and blitz at an above average rate, which also allows them to create pressure and sacks at an above average rate as well. Just needs a half sack for my guy, Alex Highsmith. So I am rolling with that one this week as my bonus.
I love
IDP
Alex
prop.
Highsmith.
Yeah. He's been excellent this year. I know people might think that he hasn't been as good as he was last year because of the sack numbers, but you look at all the other pass rush metrics for him, and he's been much better this season. So With the basketball season here, you can also now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that includes 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, LeBron James plus Travis Kelce at 10.5 combo of 3 points made plus receptions. Go to prizepicks.com/PFF fantasy. Use code PFF fantasy for first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/PFF fantasy and use code PFF fantasy for a first deposit match up to $100. All right, Kate, let's keep it going here. And we are going to go to the Seattle Seahawks at the San Francisco 49ers for the second time in 3 weeks now. So we just saw these two teams face off on Thanksgiving night in week 12. Let's start with the Seattle Seahawks because we talked a little bit about Geno Smith. This isn't a great matchup for him. So he's probably outside that top 12 to 15 quarterback range, at least for the way I'm looking at it. I don't know how you're feeling about it, but more importantly, the running backs, Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet, both players did not practice on Wednesday, dealing with injuries. This already isn't a great matchup for opposing running backs. The 49ers giving up the third fewest fantasy points per game to the position. So if any of these guys are playing, do you trust them? And if they aren't playing, are you willing to put in like a DJ Dallas, for example?
No, no, and no. I appreciate you asking. We've got to talk about the backfield.
Yeah.
I think just in general, this is probably one of the biggest traps you might fall into in week 14 if you're in need of like a flex play at running back. I know DJ Dallas might be a tempting option here because it's not very often that you get to, find a emergency play that might touch the ball 15 times, especially at the running back position. So, but all things considered, this has been a terrible matchup for running backs, especially since the addition of Chase Young. Since Young played his first game with the team in week 10 after being traded, the 49ers have had the 4th lowest EPA per carry allowed among NFL defenses, 6th highest defensive success rate against the run. Not a single running back has exceeded 50 rushing yards in that span, despite the fact that they've played guys like Travis Etienne, DeAndre Swift, Rashad White. Like all 3 of those running backs have combined for just over 23 fantasy points in that span. Not a good matchup. And I do think that if you're targeting this matchup, you're probably just doing this from a volume perspective. Yes, there is going to be a running back that touches the ball in this game, but it's not going to be an efficient matchup. At least that's what the stats would tell us at this point. And I think you've got to be very weary throwing any of these guys in your lineups, especially with the matchup, the injuries, even if one of them are healthy. It's a big flop of disaster for me.
It's a flop of disaster. Yeah, it really, yeah, I'm not trusting anybody. I mean, like you said, even if a Kenneth Walker or a Zach Charbonnet does play, there's not necessarily going to be at full health here and in just a really, really tough matchup going against the 49ers. So I'm with you, not interested in those guys unless you're desperate. But at the wide receiver position, I think we're fine starting DK Metcalf. We talked about him last week about how we didn't love the matchup, but you still kind of have to play him because the volume and the potential for production is there. And he ends up going for 3 touchdowns. So really exceeded expectations that week. But how about the other guys outside of DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith, and Jigba? I feel like they're probably more in that flex range this week going against the 49ers, but any particular interest in either of those guys?
I think I'm kind of coming on a little bit to Jackson Smith and Jigba. Like he is watching the game and not necessarily like translating to huge numbers in the box score, right? You look at last week, 7 receptions, 62 receiving yards. Very nearly would have come down with the touchdown, like just barely against the Dallas Cowboys. That was a season high 11 targets for Jackson Smith and Jigba. It really starts to feel like we are seeing the shift in terms of like a focal point of the offense between Jackson Smith and Jigba and Tyler Lockett. So, for me, I'm going to rank them DK Metcalf, Smith and Jigba, and then Lockett last but not least. I think if you're going to attack this matchup against the 49ers, you're going to probably need to do it through the air. Again, not necessarily a high upside matchup, but I really like what we've seen from Smith and Jigba over the past few weeks in terms of just looking like he's stepping into a more significant role for this team.
Nice. Yeah, he's actually looked really, really good, like you said. And I think even Nick highlighted him in the wide receiver cornerback matchups to target and avoid. He's lining up against Diamador Lenore this week, so has an advantage there. And yeah, could potentially be one of those nice deeper plays there. And I don't mind starting him over Tyler Lockett if I have to pick between the two. So I'm with you. A really easy offense to kind of go over here. The San Francisco 49ers. We're starting Christian McCaffrey. We're starting Deebo Samuel. We're starting Brandon Ayuk. We're starting George Kittle. Probably even starting Brock Purdy, right, at quarterback in most leagues. I know in week 12 versus Seattle, he didn't have a great game, but he's been really good lately. Since their week 9 bye week, so week 10 to 13, he's QB2 in fantasy behind only Dak Prescott. So has put up some pretty big performances. I feel like, he's on the fringe of starting most likely this week against Seattle, just because of that last game. There might be some hesitancy there, but they're back at home this week. He's got all the weapons. I feel fine starting Brock Purdy if I have to.
Yeah, this offense, one of the more straightforward offenses that we could possibly ask for. I do think I'm starting Brock Purdy with confidence at this point, especially you mentioned them being back at home. This is going to be, I think, a fine matchup for all involved. You are starting your San Francisco 49ers, period.
Yeah. Nice. Very nice and easy there for sure. All right. Let's go to the Minnesota Vikings at the Las Vegas Raiders. I guess we'll start with the running backs again, and we don't have to figure out the Raiders running back. So let's start with the Vikings running backs, because Alexander Mattison and Ty Chandler are the options here. Chandler not working in a ton where it looks like he's necessarily going to take over for Mattison, at least this week necessarily, but he's still playing enough to limit Madison's touches, which I think for a player who has been so inefficient, there can't be too much excitement to plug Alexander Mattison into lineups outside of leagues where just having a starting running back is good enough. It's a good matchup on paper for running backs, but I'm not interested in Alexander Mattison as a starter this week if I can afford to.
No, big no for me. And heading into that last game, we've really seemed like we were about to turn a corner with Ty Chandler. I already mentioned this, in regards to the running back situation with the Ravens. Sometimes the bye week can be the perfect time to make these changes in the offense that you had wanted to previously, but didn't necessarily have the gumption and the gall to do so in the middle of like game planning for the next opponent. Like sometimes this is when we see these shifts, and just given their play on the field, given the lack of efficiency from Alexander Mattison, I think generally speaking, it would be probably pretty smart of them to lean in favor of Ty Chandler. And this, despite the fact, this should be a good matchup, I think, which is what the most frustrating part is. So
yeah,
despite the good matchup, I'm kind of out on these running backs, but who I do think will run all over these Las Vegas Raiders? Josh Dobbs. Yeah. Let's talk about Josh Dobbs, because I think he might be the most underrated quarterback heading into this week, and honestly moving forward. He's got a great schedule coming up. If he's on your waiver wire and you've been streaming the position, I think you've got to grab him. He's like a must play at this point. I've highlighted him on my article coming out tomorrow for some high upside plays. You look at the weaponry, you're going to have Justin Jefferson returning in this game. So now he's going to be throwing to Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson. He's already got, the safe floor in the run game, 40 or more rushing yards in 7 of 12 games this year, has had a rushing touchdown in 5 of the last 6. Like, I love this matchup for him. The Raiders' greatest point of, uh, weakness here has been giving up these explosive runs. And, if things go awry, we know Josh Dobbs has the legs to get it done.
I'm with you. And I know, like, again, the recency bias of fantasy football, people are going to look at that Monday night football game in week 12 and be like, oh, Josh Dobbs sucks. And, I'm not putting him into lineups and whatever it was, 4 interceptions or something like that. But you look at what he did prior to that with the Vikings, being thrown into the fire right away as a starter, not having any time with the team really. He had at least a rushing touchdown in every single one of those games before week 12. He threw at least a passing touchdown in every one of those games as well. And now, again, like you said, coming out of the team's bye week here, where he's had another week to practice with the team, get acclimated in the offense, and gets Justin Jefferson back. I'm with you. I really like Josh Dobbs this week for sure.
Yeah, you're also, you're starting Justin Jefferson, you're starting Jordan. Like, again, the Vikings, kind of a simple team, but the one guy I really don't think you should be overthinking at this point is Josh Dobbs, my favorite sleeper quarterback of the week.
Nice. Yeah. There was talks about them maybe going to, who was it? Nick Mullins or something like that, which I didn't understand. You got to give the Dobbs another chance. You can't just go away from him after that one game. And I think he'll be able to bounce back nicely here in week 14. Let's look at the Raiders quickly. We still got AOC at quarterback there, and it hasn't been great for Jacoby Myers. Obviously, it's been fine, I guess, maybe for Davante Adams, where you feel fine starting him, but not at like the locked in wide receiver one that he once was. So, I mean, yeah, Jacoby Myers is just really more of a flex for me. I'm not really starting Michael Mayer this week. I'm starting Davante Adams and Josh Jacobs. So how much more is there to figure out with this Raiders offense, you think?
I mean, that's kind of it. I do think, Jacoby Myers still remains in that flex consideration for me. You love to see him get the touchdown last week.
Yeah.
I think from an upside perspective, like he might not have the highest ceiling, but we've talked about some really ugly matchups so far this week. I do think you could do worse than Jacoby Myers overall. But again, I think anytime you're trusting this Raiders pass attack, you there are peaks and there are going to be much, much lower valleys. So you've got to take your lumps and all that good stuff. But you don't love the matchup. At least it's indoors, right? Like,
that's true. Yeah, and that's really why, like, he stays in that flex area for me this week. And the good thing too, like the Vikings, again, one more of those zone heavy teams, a top 10 zone team, and Jacoby Myers has been better against zone coverage this year. 0.43 fantasy points per out run against zone, which is tied for 19th at the position. He's also had a better target rate against zone coverage, 22% compared to man, which was just 17%. So solid numbers there. So if you do have to put Jacoby Myers into a lineup, I don't think it's the worst thing. You just got to hope for some positives out of Aiden O'Connell at quarterback. All right, let's go to the Los Angeles Chargers and the Denver Broncos. I kind of want to start with the Chargers offense because it's a pretty easy one to figure out, but Austin Eckler, to me, has been really, really, I mean, not just to me, I'm sure to a lot of fantasy managers, he's been super, super frustrating. So the Broncos are giving up the most fantasy points per game to the running back position, but I'm not overly excited about Austin Eckler this week, right? This has been by far his worst season across the board, right? 3.5 yards per carry. He's got just 4 rushing touchdowns this year. 2.63 yards after contact per attempt is a career worst for him. 1.34 yards per route run, career worst. Far and away the worst elusive rating he's ever had for us, at 38.5. He's never been below 57.9 in his career, so he's ranks 46th out of 61 running backs in elusive rating. We even saw more Josh Kelly last week. He played, I think, 43% of the snaps. Eckler just the 57%. So that was the lowest for him since week 1, where he got injured in that game. So I'm concerned about Austin Eckler. Like, I'm starting him this week because it's against the Broncos, because he's Austin Eckler. If his name wasn't Austin Eckler, I there's a chance that I'm probably benching this kind of player for most leagues if I got better options.
Ooh, we are just 3 weeks out from a 3-week stretch where Austin Eckler was a top 5 running back. How
Yeah,
quickly we forget. But
I'm
I
mad.
actually I'm looking at, you, and I'm looking at the situation, and I have to say, like, all very fair. And, just in general, last year wasn't the most efficient season for, Austin Eckler, but was able to kind of piecemeal it together for fantasy because of that touchdown production. That's just something we haven't seen for him to the degree that we've seen in previous seasons. Now, what's really the most interesting about this conversation across the board is that we had head coach Brandon Staley come out and kind of hint, I think it was just today, or it might have been yesterday. I saw the report today, sorry. But Austin Eckler, basically hinting that Austin Eckler is going to start getting some competition for carries. You mentioned that increased usage of Josh Kelly. Exact quote: competition for carries is going to be something you can see happening. We're going to keep exploring, making adjustments so we can find the rhythm I've been talking about. And that's one way to do it. I don't love that. We know Austin is a good running back, Staley said. We just haven't found any rhythm in the last couple of weeks in the run game. Just need to keep after it, work harder in practice. I'm going to say this 100%. Like, if Brandon Staley thinks Austin Eckler is the problem with this offense, he might be misjudging things in general. But if like, Brandon Staley's seat is hotter than my stove, on a hot summer's eve cooking stew, he needs to find a scapegoat. And I think at this point, he's throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. And Austin Eckler might be a victim to that. But this is too good a matchup to sit him.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing, right? You're still putting him out there. It's just these last few weeks have been super, super frustrating. And he just hasn't looked like the same player either. So to that
For
part,
Dynasty, John, I will say I am very much panicked. Very much panicked for Austin Eckler. Like, we're talking redraft here, so I'm less panicked, but like, boy, if you're looking at Austin Eckler and you're wondering what to do, I think it's time to sell low, because you mentioned all of the efficiency metrics are pointing to the decline of Austin Eckler. He's 28 years old, ranks top 15 in total touches among active running backs. Like, all of those are alarming, but I still think he's got some juice in the left, at least for 2023, at least for week 14.
I really hope you're right. I know, like, for me, I'm starting him. I know a lot of people obviously are going to be starting Austin Eckler across the board, right? So we need him to come through this week, because he has let us down in recent weeks here, and just can't survive another week like that with Austin Eckler at running back, unfortunately. So the rest of the Chargers offense, again, they've also struggled, but I mean, we're still starting Keenan Allen and probably Justin Herbert in most leagues, but outside of that, there's nobody that I'm overly interested in. How about you?
No, and like, even, I feel like everybody's kind of had their lumps this year, except, for generally speaking, except for Keenan Allen, who coming off a down week. But like Justin Herbert, even, I think, I highlighted this in Panic or Antic column. This has been kind of an up and down year. Justin Herbert's been relatively safe, but you look at, these games that he doesn't perform to his highest, and they're all kind of predictable games. So I don't want to call Justin Herbert a matchup dependent quarterback, but when you're looking at his overall ceiling and you're trying to predict his floor games, matchups have been kind of right on point for him. Like, he's really, really good in plus matchups, and he's not as good in in bad matchups, which like that's the quarterback position. But it turns out even the most talented of quarterbacks aren't necessarily immune to that.
Yeah, no, for sure. He's another one that, yeah, I've been starting and rolling him out there because, again, he's Justin Herbert, and we've seen him, play well even with, bad injuries and lack of receiving options and the Brandon Staley offense. But yeah, this is a nice matchup for him. I feel fine starting him this week. How about on the Broncos side of things? Anybody that you want to start with for Denver's offense?
Uh, should we talk about Cortland Sutton,
Sure.
Mr. Touchdown himself? Like, we've seen a lot of production here from Cortland Sutton. It hasn't necessarily translated to a ton of fantasy points. Like he's been, I think a very reliable wide receiver 2 this season. Is he a locked and loaded wide receiver 2 every week, regardless of matchup, regardless of anything, based on his touchdown production? Because like, okay, so, halfway through the season, you're looking at Cortland Sutton, you're like, boy, he's scoring a lot of touchdowns. And then, right around, I don't know, like week 9, you're like, he can't really do this, right? And then he keeps doing it. Now we're here entering week 14, scored a touchdown in all 3 games. Really likes Cortland Sutton, even like a yardage standpoint. Fewer than 50 receiving yards in just 5 total games this year. Even in those matchups, though, he's had a receiving touchdown in 4 of those 5 games where he didn't manage 50 receiving yards. So like you're looking at Cortland Sutton, you're like, okay, the floor might be a lot safer than a lot of wide receivers out there. And I'm starting to maybe just think I need to bite the bullet and accept the fact that Cortland Sutton is a good start for fantasy most weeks.
Yeah, I think he's their wide receiver 1, right? He has established himself that connection with Russell Wilson. Wilson's looking for him. He's getting him the ball, and he's made some really nice passes and some really nice catches to get some of those touchdowns. So, he's highlighted that talent as well. So really like to see that from Cortland Sutton. And I'm with you. I'm leaving him locked into that wide receiver 2 spot for the most part, pretty much regardless of matchups at this point. So outside of him, I feel fine starting Javonte Williams and even Russell Wilson, who's been a lot better as of late, as surprising as that has been after last year, but he's been good. And this Broncos team has been a lot better as well. But Jerry Jeudy is the one that I don't think I can trust in starting lineups anymore. I don't know. I don't feel great about ever having to put him in there. And it just feels like this is a Cortland Sutton offense at this point, like a 1 wide receiver type offense that there's not enough necessarily to go around to trust Jerry Jeudy. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I don't want to touch Jerry Jeudy with a 10-foot pole. Now, like you look at Russell Wilson, his production has been like pretty steady at the quarterback position. He's been like a QB 10 to QB like 13. It feels like every game this season, except for like maybe 2. But Cortland Sutton is clearly the focal point of that offense. And what upside has Jerry Jeudy offered you this season?
None.
He hasn't finished ahead of wide receiver 29 yet this season.
Yeah.
Not once.
Yeah. He's just not doing anything. So
Josh Reynolds has outscored him so far this season. So
yeah,
Kendrick Bourne, who tore his ACL 5 weeks ago, has scored more fantasy points this season than Jerry Jeudy. I rest my case. Don't insane. Even think about it.
Yeah. Stay away from Jerry Jeudy, and we can probably move on from Denver, and let's talk about the Buffalo Bills at the Kansas City Chiefs. Should be a good one here, Kate. We know what we're looking at here for the Kansas City offense for the most part. Patrick Mahomes, Isaiah Pacheco, Rashee Rice has established himself now, a little bit more consistency at Travis Kelce as well, but it's been nice to see Rashee Rice have that consistency now in recent weeks and in as far as usage goes. And I know he's been, one of those guys that's been dominant against zone coverages this year and hasn't been as good against man, but he's even starting to climb up the leaderboard now in fantasy points per route run against man coverages. He's ranked, I think, tied for 18th in fantasy points per route run against man. So just doing everything, checking all the boxes, our guy Rashee Rice. So those are the main guys that I'm starting for Kansas City. But anything else for the Chiefs offense for you?
The only thing I want to note, so we have Isaiah Pacheco. He's dealing with a shoulder injury. So
Okay.
I believe he missed Thursday's practice already officially. So that's 2 missed practices. You also have Jerick McKinnon, who's missed the last, I think, 2 weeks with a groin injury. Here's the question. Like, if he's active, you're starting Isaiah Pacheco, no question. If both of these running backs are inactive, what is your chance of starting Clyde Edwards-Helaire? Because you look at the matchup against the Bills, it should be a relatively high-scoring game, giving up the 13th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. That's been fine. But like, all in all, this has been a really favorable matchup for opposing running backs in terms of like explosive runs given up. Their rushing defense, I think the number of injuries they've had on defense this year has really started to impact their ability to cover the run. And I do think, okay, bold take for the week. If Isaiah Pacheco is out, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a top 24 running back this week. Is that bold enough? Should I get
Top
bolder?
24. Is it like McKinnon's out as well, or?
Even if McKinnon's active, I'll say top 24 running
Oh,
back this week
okay,
if
that's
Isaiah
bold.
Pacheco is out. And I think there could be plenty of points to be scored in this game. We've seen Isaiah Pacheco be an absolute force, but if he's unavailable, I do think it's Clyde Edwards-Helaire who's going to take up the majority of the carries, even though, of course, McKinnon kind of has stake on a lot of that work as a receiver.
Right.
I don't know. I feel like it could be like the juiciest play of the week that nobody would ever want to play.
Well, there you go. I don't mind it. I know it is spicy for sure, but I mean, I think you're right. Like, we've seen them use Clyde Edwards-Helaire around the goal line. Not a ton, but he's had his opportunities there. So it's not like they've completely avoided him in those situations. We've seen, obviously Jerick McKinnon dealing with the injury. I think he was limited on Wednesday. So the DNP for Pacheco on Thursday is definitely not a good sign. So we may get this Clyde Edwards-Helaire option, and he could be one of those sneaky like emergency plays, like you say, and like you write about for Friday's piece. He could be one of those guys that emerges here as a potential starter. And like you said, the Chiefs offense, they get into position to score. There's going to be opportunity there, and that's really what we're looking for.
Yeah, I think right on point there.
Nice. All right, let's go to the Buffalo Bills now. And another group. I mean, obviously, Josh Allen's a starter. Stephon Diggs is a starter. How about the tight ends? Because Dawson Knox did return to practice this week. I don't know that he's necessarily going to play. If he does, do you still feel okay about starting Dalton Kincaid in this offense? I don't know that Dawson Knox necessarily going to play his full-time role in the first week back. So I'm okay starting with Kincaid. Are you?
I think Kincaid's upside's just been too high. I think
Yeah.
in general, matchups, regardless of matchup, I think he's a fine play week in and week out. But I do think that just generally speaking, you looked at Dawson Knox's production the few weeks leading up to his stint on IR. He was getting more targets than Kincaid, but the efficiency on those targets was just absolutely
Right.
dreadful. I have to imagine coming out of a bye, I have to not coming out of bye, come with him coming off of IR. I have to imagine that they've done some hard thinking on which of these tight ends might be better. Now, maybe we see a little bit of a lower ceiling for Kincaid because I think Knox has had a fairly stable role in the red zone, but all in all, I think, you're looking at Kincaid mostly for his production as a route runner and not necessarily
Mhm.
for a lot of the blocking roles that we see Knox play historically.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think the cat's out of the bag here with Dalton Kincaid at this point, right? Like they've seen now what he can do as that featured tight end role. And I think it's hard to kind of go away from that at this point, just like you said, because the efficiency has been so much better with him as a receiving option than Dawson Knox. So I'm with you. I'm fine starting Kincaid. I'm probably not starting Gabe Davis this week. I feel like we've talked about this man's zone difference for him on this podcast before, but he just hasn't performed as well against man coverage this season. And the Chiefs are a very good defense. They're a very good man coverage team as well. They play that at a top 10 rate. Gabe Davis ranks 80th among wide receivers in fantasy points per route run against man coverage. He also has a 62.5 receiving grade versus man coverage, which ranks tied for 74th among wide receivers. So this is a guy that again, he's had those up and down weeks, right? Where, 1 week he's great, 1 week he's not. This feels like one of those weeks where he's not. So he would be somebody that I don't know that I'd be starting this week against Kansas City.
I think that's fair.
And yeah, anybody else for the Buffalo Bills worth talking about for you?
No, I want to shout out our guy, James Cook, who continues to have like this monstrous workload after the firing of Ken Dorsey. It just feels like the tides have turned a little bit, 20 plus touches each of the last 2 weeks. Like it just feels like he is finally getting that volume now that Ken Dorsey is out of the building. So again, just every week he is a start, period.
Yeah, just can we please give the guy some more goal line work? I just
that would be crazy.
It would be too much, right? But yeah, he's been excellent. He's been efficient. I think 10th among running backs in yards per carry this year, 4.8. Just the one rushing touchdown, but 2 receiving touchdowns as well. So I think he'll still be heavily involved this week, which is nice for James Cook, and definitely somebody that we can start. Philadelphia Eagles at the Dallas Cowboys, Sunday Night Football. This is going to be at least a very good primetime game, I would think. So we know we're starting Dak Prescott. We're starting CeeDee Lamb, obviously. Tony Pollard, we're starting as well. He's had a rushing touchdown in 3 straight. Now he gets the Eagles, of course, who are giving up the fewest fantasy points per game to running backs. But yeah, I feel fine starting Tony Pollard. I mean, maybe that touchdown streak comes to an end this week, unfortunately, because of the matchup. It is tougher, but volume and everything has been there. The targets have been there. I know he hasn't had much as far as a receiver goes. Like he had that one game with 80 receiving yards, but outside of that, not really doing a lot with his receptions this year. 41st among running backs in yards per reception at 5.9. So, but you're fine starting Tony Pollard. I don't know why I'm ranting about that.
Because he's given us a lot to rant about this season.
It's been
there was a drought, and now, we might not get as much as we hope for in this matchup that obviously is a challenging one up against this Philly defensive line, but you look at the landscape and there's not a lot of running backs you're going to trust to get this kind of volume on a week in, week out basis. Like you said, obviously we're starting Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb. Both of them are on fire. I think the only question I have left is, Jake Ferguson, obviously, like he's just continuing to cook. I was a little nervous about his matchup last week and he proved me wrong. But the other question mark, Brandon Cooks. This is a great matchup for fantasy wide receivers this year. Didn't do really anything at all in their first meeting. 1 catch, 7 receiving yards. But generally speaking, we've seen Brandon Cooks on a little bit of a hot streak, a touchdown in all but 2 of the last 7 games. And again, one of those games coming against the Philadelphia Eagles, which was kind of a surprise stinker for me. The other one came against the Carolina Panthers. Hasn't been the greatest matchup for wide receivers, but I think a comparable matchup is, maybe what we saw from in the Thanksgiving game against the Washington Commanders. Cooks posted 4 receptions, 72 receiving yards, and a score. I think that's a fairly reasonable stat line that we might be able to project for Cooks in this matchup. Am I getting too caught up in the fact that like this Eagles offense has given so many fantasy points to wide receivers, so many yards? Like this has been a great matchup. Am I getting too cute with Brandon Cooks? Do I need to come back down to earth?
No, I'm good. I'm good starting Brandon Cooks. And like you said, it's a nice matchup. The way that Dak Prescott has been playing recently, the way this offense has been rolling, there's absolutely room there, right? It's not just CeeDee Lamb. We've seen Brandon Cooks be productive. We've seen Jake Ferguson be productive. Like Dak is getting everybody involved here, and that's been really nice to see. So Cooks has been he's been hot lately, and I think you just continue to ride that hot hand where you've been starting him. And he's maybe not necessarily your wide receiver two. He's more likely your flex option. I think you can leave him in that flex spot and continue to put him in those lineups going forward. So yeah, I'm with you.
You.
On the Philadelphia side of things, fairly easy one. We're starting Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith. You had wrote about the panic or antic article as well about DeAndre Swift getting outstaffed by Kenneth Gainwell in week 14. So I know DeAndre Swift, he had left late last game as well with potential injury, but he's not on the injury report anymore. So what are you expecting from the Eagles running backs here this week against the Cowboys?
I think you probably just got to expect that they're going to continue to roll with DeAndre Swift. That was kind of an odd situation. You saw Kenneth Gainwell even out snapping DeAndre Swift just slightly before the injury. They never disclosed what the injury was. It was kind of weird, but the game was pretty much over at that point. So maybe it just didn't matter. And maybe they, let him sit for the rest of the game there. But you look at DeAndre Swift and the upside's too great. It's not the best matchup, of course, but in their first meeting earlier this year, 74 yards, 20 touches. I think generally speaking, the 6 carry game is probably an outlier for Swift. And especially being left off the injury report entirely in this game or ahead of this game, I feel a little bit better about that.
Yeah, for sure. I'm fine starting DeAndre Swift as well. And Dallas Goedert could be back this week. I don't know that I'm necessarily starting him if he is back. I would rather just trust AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, DeAndre Swift in the passing game, especially against the Cowboys, and it being Dallas Goedert's first game back from injury. Let's just give him a chance to ramp up his workload as well. So not somebody that we have to start this week. You've been surviving without him. We could survive one more week without him until we see what that usage is, I think anyways. All right, let's go to one of 2 Monday Night Football games for some reason. Here in week 14, we have the Green Bay Packers at the New York Giants. I don't know which one of these is on whatever the streaming services that we don't get in Canada that nobody could watch unless they have it. Maybe it's this one. I don't know. But let's start with the Green Bay Packers. Aaron Jones potentially back this week. That's probably one of the bigger question marks I have for this game, because we've seen the team limit Aaron Jones's playing time coming off injury already this season. So are you comfortable starting Aaron Jones in a pretty good matchup here against the Giants on Monday night? It's not a guarantee that he plays. So you're probably waiting for him to be confirmed to play as well. So how are you approaching the Packers running backs?
Cautiously. I know this is a good matchup. AJ Dillon, for what it's worth, hasn't seen a ton of yardage production, still has just scored a single touchdown all this season. Despite having had this sort of lead role at running back with Aaron Jones out. I would be cautious rolling out Aaron Jones in this lineup, just knowing he's been banged up quite a bit this year. So we've seen him come in and out of the lineup several times in his first game. I don't know that I would expect a whole ton, a significant snap share, but if he is back, that also really tempers my expectations for AJ Dillon, who I think, his, as little production as he's kind of perpetrated for you, he's been in some tough matchups, but it's been so dependent on some of that volume. So if he even has to split, another 30% of that volume, I do think that kind of takes him out of consideration for even a flex play. So definitely keep a close eye on Aaron Jones and any reports coming out there, because, again, if both are active, I don't want to play either.
Mhm.
I wouldn't be surprised if one of them had a career day against this defense, but I don't love the likelihood of split carries. I think both of these guys are very risky, and I'm not sure either of them has a significant enough ceiling for me to risk that in a week 14 matchup where I'm probably looking to clinch my playoff spot. I'm looking for a higher seeding in my fantasy playoffs. Like, this is do or die week, and the Green Bay backfield just feels a little bit risky to be toying with at this point.
Yep, I am with you there. I'm trying to avoid it if possible. As far as their wide receivers go, Christian Watson has been really good lately. He's been scoring touchdowns and obviously coming off a big week, and draws a really nice matchup here against the Giants, who are giving up the fourth most fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position. This was another one that I highlighted in the wide receiver man zone coverage report. Giants are playing man coverage at the second highest rate in the league, and they've really just been an average man coverage defense as far as yards allowed per coverage snap and explosive play rate allowed. But Christian Watson has been especially effective against man coverage, generating 0.63 fantasy points per route run, which is 12th among wide receivers. He has an 81.5 receiving grade against man coverage, which is 16th, and also has an elite target rate here at 28% as well. So really nice matchup for him to potentially stay hot here against the Giants. And yeah, I like Christian Watson this week, which is not something I was saying in weeks prior. So
the only
yeah,
concern, he did get banged up again
right,
with a
right.
hamstring injury. So
That's
keep an
right.
eye on those practice reports. I haven't seen any updates for Thursday yet. Wasn't super surprised he sat out Wednesday, but could be a name to watch. Thursday, Friday, you're going to want to see him get some kind of practice. But if he's, either out or limited in any fashion in this game, I want to shout out Jaden Reed as probably the best pivot at that point. Just, in general, you mentioned you're always on the zone, man zone coverage report. Romeo Dobbs, most of his production has come against zone coverage this year. 85% of his receiving yards against zone coverage, minimal target share against man. So we're kind of seeing, I think, if you're going to pivot to one of these guys, I think it should be Jaden Reed, who's been a little bit more efficient against man coverage this season, just given the situation. He's had a plentiful target rate. This could be a nice bounce back spot for him after a kind of lackluster week 13.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I skipped right over the questionable tag in my my notes here for Christian Watson, but it looks like
We
he
can
did not
dream.
practice. We could. He didn't practice on Thursday, so that is yeah, that might be a nail in the coffin there. So some wasted breath there on Christian Watson potentially, but I'm with you on Jaden Reed over Romeo Dobbs here potentially, even though Romeo Dobbs has been good. Like you said, there has been a difference there for him against man and zone teams as well. Not starting the tight end Tucker Kraft. I am fine starting Jordan Love, who's been solid. How about the Giants side of things? This should be a pretty easy one to figure out. We're starting Saquon Barkley reluctantly, but is there anybody else on the New York Giants that you want to put in there?
No.
No, fair enough. Let's move on to the
It's
next
all the
Monday night.
analysis we need for that. No.
It really is. Yeah, it really is. I don't think we try to get cute at this point in the season with the Giants. So let's talk about the other Monday night football game. It's the Tennessee Titans at the Miami Dolphins. Miami's offense has been pretty straightforward as well. There's no tight ends we're talking about. So we're starting Tua Tagovailoa. We're starting Tyreek Hill. We're starting Jalen Waddle. We are starting Devin Achane, who took over in week 13 with more playing time, more carries, more targets as well. But I feel like we could even still start Raheem Mostert. How about you? Do you feel like Mostert's still got a spot to be fantasy relevant this week?
Yeah, we saw. I'm not nearly as hot on Raheem Mostert in this matchup. Looking at their usage, he did get a lot of early work in week 13, and you saw Achane get, sort of more involved as the game went on. But what I'm really liking about Achane especially is the fact that in this game, saw a ton of volume, and I don't even care when the volume is, even if it came, in some of those garbage time situations a little bit. But just in general, I think, especially given his injuries and, the kind of in and outs that we've seen for him, to come out here and see him have 20 touches in this game, I think was a super encouraging sign, that there are no lingering health concerns whatsoever for Achane moving forward. And I think he's a full go. So if he saw 20 carries in this game, I have to imagine that he's going to get to, continue to see some of that steady workload, break off a couple of tackles and you're done, game over. Not necessarily like a gimme matchup here for the Titans. But I think we could be in a fine spot, maybe to play both, but, definitely leaning Achane if I have both and I can only start one.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And yeah, like if anybody's saying, a lot of Achane's touches came in a blowout or anything like that, well, they're facing the Tennessee Titans, where they are 13-point favorites here at home. So I think there's definitely more potential there for Achane
That is
touches.
so brutal. That's just mean.
I know.
Just mean.
So on the Tennessee Titans side of things, again, fairly easy offense to figure out for fantasy purposes. We're starting Derrick Henry. Fine starting DeAndre Hopkins. I think Tennessee is going to have to try to play catch up here for the most part. So Hopkins should be involved. It could mean more Tajay Spears but I don't know. I'm not overly excited about that one. Maybe Derrick Henry and DeAndre Hopkins might be the only ones we're starting. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, very very tough to, I think, start anybody outside of sort of the main suspects. Now we have seen Spears a little bit more involved in some of these like runaway games. Maybe we see a little bit of Spears, but I don't think it's going to be anything worth actually pivoting to start in your fantasy leagues. I think it's kind of Derrick Henry, who it notably is in the concussion protocol, but it sounds like he probably should be fine. Returned to practice earlier this week, I believe, on Wednesday. But it's Derrick Henry, it's DeAndre Hopkins, and even DeAndre Hopkins, like this Miami secondary since the return of Jalen Ramsey, they look solid. They're playing some really good football here. So I think DeAndre Hopkins, you're probably hoping for like a 50-yard game and a touchdown. Like that's probably what you can expect in this outing. I don't think this is going to be a career day by any means for DeAndre Hopkins, but you'll take what you can get.
Yes, I think that's a good way of putting it. And with that is going to wrap up our week 14 preview episode. Again, thank you all so much for listening or watching on the YouTube. Again, it's a very big and stressful week for a lot of fantasy football managers. So hopefully that information helped you set your lineups and get a W this week. A huge thank you to Kate as well for going through it all with me. Kate, as always, really appreciate you coming on here and dropping all this knowledge for the folks. So before you go, please let everybody know where they could find you and what you have up on pff.com this week.
Yeah, if you want to follow me on Twitter, at Kate Magdziuk, it's Magdziuk, or you can always follow my work along with PFF every week. Every Tuesday, I've got the Panic or Antic column. Every Wednesday, the Rushing Report, and every Friday, some high upside sleeper plays. If your lineups are in a need of a little bit of spice, I've got you covered.
Nice. Like it. I'm looking forward to checking that out as well. And then, as for me, we got the IDP fantasy report, IDP rankings, wide receiver man zone coverage report, O-line, D-line matchups to target and avoid as well, all up on the website by tomorrow morning. So that's it. I would say enjoy Steelers Patriots tonight, but the odds are not in our favor. Instead, Patrick Kane makes his debut with the Red Wings tonight. That's the real show to watch, and I know at least I'll be watching that. So come cheer on the Wings and the best American-born hockey player to make his debut with the good guys. Other than that, good luck to everybody making the fantasy playoffs out there and winning those week 14 matchups. I appreciate you all. And until next time, peace out.